Yeah, I did change, and I'm really glad I changed.
This one's wife. Why has the media not exposed them? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. There are a lot of people that don't like Harry and this one's wife. They don't like them because, for instance, as the Sidley twins stated, they regard them as having engaged in elder abuse. Others don't like them for the way that they've treated the monarchy as a whole. Others don't like them because they see them as always on the grift, a pair of deceitful individuals that have shat on the concept of service and thereafter gone off in their own self-serving manner, purely motivated by money. There are individuals who don't like them because of the telling of lies, the revisions of history, the lack of class that is exhibited. They regard Harry as a bratish man-child who needs his pants pulled down and his body given a good smacking and sent to bed with no supper. In relation to this one's wife, they regard her as a conniving narcissist that has somehow managed to worm her way into the royal family and then has run around with a rictus grin ever since, trying to make out that she's some kind of living saint. Many believe that they ought to receive their comeuppance, that there is a sense of injustice so far that they have not been held to account for their various lies, that they have not suffered the exposure for the nefarious engagements that they have dealt in. Particularly with regard to this one's wife, there are those that often scratch their heads wondering why it is there hasn't been an overall takedown by the press. Regularly, I have people emailing me asking, HG, why is it that the press have not exposed the fake pregnancies? Why hasn't anybody from the mainstream media investigated the shady goings-on with regard to the financial shenanigans of Archwell? Why hasn't anybody scrutinised their tax status? Why is it that nobody has looked into, in a meaningful fashion, the allegations surrounding her being a yacht girl? What about the fact that we suggest that this is the third marriage that she's on? Why isn't mainstream media reporting on the first marriage that was annulled and the fact that she actually has a child from that marriage? Why is nobody from mainstream media looking at the fact that she was involved in a hazing incident and that was all hushed up? The sense of frustration from those that correspond with me on such matters is palpable. They don't understand why mainstream media, with all its resources and investigative teeth, has not got its teeth into all of those things to expose the Sussexes and particularly this one's wife. They understand that there must be so many skeletons in so many closets that there must be some intrepid investigator, some enthusiastic journalist that wants to take up the mantle of the investigation and get to the heart of what has gone on. And yet, this one's wife has been prominent for coming on for 8 years, and none of these things have happened. Is it the case that she is so powerful that nobody wants to lay a glove on her in that regard? Is she so effective that she has managed to ensure that any skeletons from her past remain simply hidden in the past? What could it be? Well, to my mind, there are 5 potential answers as to why the media, the mainstream media, hasn't exposed them. There are plenty of bloggers, people commenting on social media and YouTubers, for example, that regularly offer their theories, their speculations, their observations, some based on evidence, some less so, in relation to what has gone on. In some instances, there is a paucity of information available, and it does, with certain allegations, seem to be the case that there isn't actually any evidence that exists other than the speculation, which has then taken on a life of its own and has then been treated as canon information. But let us explore what those 5 reasons could be as to why the media has not exposed the Sussexes, and in particular this one's wife. The first is that, in effect, they believe that there is no interest in exposure, that they deem that it isn't something that ought to be done, that instead they should just report on them, and that people as a whole aren't interested in such exposure, that the relevant editors at the newspapers, the relevant decision makers at news channels, etc., deem that the audience don't actually have an interest in exposure. I don't see this as credible. There are many people who want to know about these things. It might not be as many as you might imagine, but you only have to look at social media for the attention that certain videos about the pregnancies, the moon bumps, the yacht girls, a relationship prior with Prince Andrew, etc., the number of views that those attract to demonstrate that there is interest in those matters. And therefore, I do not see that the media has deemed, no, it's not really of interest to the masses, therefore we won't run with it. The second could be, actually, they have investigated these things and found them to be not true, and therefore there's nothing to report on. This is a possibility. As I've stated, there are certain rumours, and I've addressed this in the past, where there is a dearth of actual evidence, and it seems to be more rumour than something that has actually occurred. Nevertheless, when has the truth actually got in the way of a good story, is often stated, and there is evidence that in certain of these rumours would at least merit some form of investigation to state whether it is true or not. There are some of the allegations which aren't mere frippery. There is some substance behind them, and one might anticipate that a suitable investigative journalist would want to find out just how much substance is there. Accordingly, I don't ultimately think that in relation to all of the allegations that they have been investigated and found to be not true. That might be the case with a handful of them, but there are so many of them, and some with greater levels of substance, that I don't think it's the case that the press have already looked at it and thought, actually, there's nothing to see here, we've investigated it, and therefore there's nothing to report on further. The third reason why the media hasn't exposed them might be the presence of a super injunction. Namely, that at some point in the past, this one's wife and Harry have secured a super injunction to prevent the disclosure of certain information, and that the presence of the super injunction can't even be spoken about. A number of years ago, super injunctions were quite prevalent, often used, for instance, by footballers who'd been up to no good, and in order to preserve their privacy and argue against the suggestion of public interest, they obtained super injunctions to prevent a newspaper reporting on their dalliances, and the newspaper could not then even say, we've been gagged. There have been repeated instances of references to the existence of a super injunction, not by the press itself, but by those on social media. But that has been done not on the basis of actual evidence that it would have been obtained, but rather as speculation that is why certain of the rumours have never been followed up or investigated further by media. That it's a reasonable conclusion to reach, given that these rumours are so prevalent and so juicy, surely someone would have gone after them. The fact that they haven't must point to the existence of a super injunction. This has credibility. However, there's a major flaw. The flaw is this, that it is likely that this one's wife and Harry, if they had obtained such an injunction, they would have obtained it in the jurisdiction of England and Wales, i.e. in the English courts. And therefore it would apply to the English media, but it would not restrain the media in the United States. Now, it might be argued that those in the US were not that interested in them because they weren't as prominent as people imagined them to be. But what about Australia or even Canada? Many Australians have no time for them, and indeed the Australian media regularly lampoons the gruesome twosome. The straight-talking Antipodeans regularly point out their flaws, and therefore If they had obtained a super injunction and in relation to certain matters, one would anticipate that Australia, being outside of the legal jurisdiction, would have had reporters making mention of it, and the fact they have not tends to support the fact that there isn't actually a super injunction that is keeping matters quiet. So if it's not a lack of interest, and it's not the case that actually none of the rumours are true, and it isn't the case that it's a super injunction, what could it be that means that the mainstream media, invariably always on the lookout for an exclusive, is causing them not to investigate arguably the most famous couple in the world when there are so many rumours swirling around them? Surely there are many juicy gossip dragons that could be slayed for the purposes of increased circulation. Might it be a fear of litigation? Well, the Sussexes are notorious litigious. We've seen, for instance, this one's wife taking action against Associated Newspapers Limited, and Harry has seen himself as Dragon Slayer Supreme in relation to his various pieces of litigation, albeit one suspects that he has been coerced into being involved in the hacking claims when he doesn't fully understand what it's all about, and he's just been brought on board as a big name, and he's gone along with it. Accordingly, it's possible that the media doesn't want to get itself involved in litigation. When Harry and this one's wife were working members of the royal family, what was quite apparent was that there was a reluctance for the courts to really find against them. For instance, the judgment that occurred in the Associated Newspapers instance, that certain members of the judiciary saw it as a duty to try and defend those members of the royal family because they didn't want to, for instance, upset the late Queen, etc. Nevertheless, the Sussexes are no longer part of the royal family as working members, and therefore the extension of that protection would have faded. In the circumstances, newspapers perhaps would have less to fear in relation to going into litigation, but possibly they see it as unduly expensive and time-consuming and would prefer to avoid it. It still seems to me that the upside of such exposure, getting those exclusives, if the information is correct and the attention it would draw, would outweigh the potential cost of litigation. But it is a potential influencing factor that might mean that the press has not been moved to expose them. But I don't see it as the panacea. I don't see it as the overriding reason that means that the media has stayed stum, but an influencing factor rather than a deciding factor. To my mind, the deciding factor as to why the press hasn't gone for the jugular, why the media hasn't blown them away with repeated exposures in relation to the various rumours that I touched on earlier, is as a consequence of the fact that the media recognises that this would slay the golden goose. If they were exposed, for instance, to have faked the pregnancies, be involved in dirty dealings financially, that the less salubrious aspects of this one's wife's past were exposed, which effectively rendered them persona non grata, so that nobody wanted to work with them, nobody wanted to be involved with them, so that they had to retreat and hide away, that would then mean there would be nothing more to report on. And at the current time, the newspapers and the broadcasters know that there is a huge audience out there that still wants to hear about the Sussexes. That audience translates into clicks, which translates into advertising revenue. And therefore, the proprietors and the editors recognise that if they were to expose, it would likely slay the golden goose, which would mean that all of the ongoing clicks would be lost. There'd be nothing more to report on. Now, of course, there's always other subjects to move on to, but the Sussexes, in a sense, are a bit of a gravy train for the media. Even when they're not doing much, you can still see that this one's wife pumps out the PR puff pieces, and there's plenty of speculative instances of so-called royal experts talking about what this might mean, what might happen next, where this might go to, which people continue to click on and comment upon. Thus, they continue to have matters ticking over, speculating about the rift between Harry and William, whether the Sussexes will return to the United Kingdom, what the next business move of this one's wife might be, before the Sussexes then turn up at an event and there's a frenzy of reportage about that, or they go to Nigeria, or there's a near catastrophic car chase, etc. To my mind, the media recognises that it does very well out of the continued existence of the Sussexes, that the fact of their downward spiral whilst occurring is such that so long as the public continue to want to know what they're doing, continue to want to learn about what they're up to, continue to want to criticise the Sussexes, there's a ready audience, and that the media doesn't want to get rid of that audience by finally exposing the Sussexes. Now, there is a potential threat to that. There's almost a sort of established understanding between various aspects of the media that none of us is going to slay the golden goose. Nobody's going to do the exposure, okay, guys? We're all just going to let it keep going on. We all benefit from this, so everybody keep those investigations that you might have undertaken under wraps. And thus, there is this loose understanding between the various proprietors and editors that whatever information you've got that could blow them away, you don't release it, because then we'll all suffer. We'll slay the golden goose. There is a risk, however, that a smaller outfit, if it's got the resources and the ability to undertake the investigative work, could be the one that steps forward. They aren't interested in a continuing gravy train. This might be, for instance, a one-off documentary that's undertaken by an organisation that hitherto hasn't really bothered in relation to them, doesn't derive an ongoing source of income from the Sussexes and advertising in relation to them, but actually is more interested in making thought-provoking material and therefore has undertaken the investigative work, which they will then provide and expose. That is a risk to all of the other media giants. They want to preserve the status quo. Let the Sussexes continue to be an object of speculation. Let them be spoken about. Let them be the subject of rumours. Let them be the subject of speculation. Let's then all talk about the latest hoo-ha that they've become involved in. Now it's gone quiet. More speculation, more speculation. Here's the next activity that's come along. Let them keep going, because as long as they do so, we're getting views, we're getting clicks, we're getting advertising revenue. Long may it continue. Thus, they have no motivation to expose them. However, there could be an independent outfit, a documentary maker, a smaller circulating magazine of some type that might have a vested interest in the exposure, because the exposure is more meaningful to them than the ongoing presence of the Sussexes. For instance, this might be the German production company that has been creating a documentary which apparently has been delayed. Why? Might it be the threat of legal action against them by this one's wife? Might it be that they want to get all of their ducks in a row to ensure that all of their information is accurate before releasing it? Remains to be seen. It also remains to be seen whether that documentary will just be revisiting things that we already know, or whether it might actually be seismic in its application. And therefore, might they be the ones to expose? We'll have to wait and see. But with regard to the question of why the media so far has not exposed them, to my mind, the answer is the media has no interest in doing so because it serves a better purpose to keep them ticking along, rather than expose them and have them ultimately go into hiding. What are your views about this? Do you agree? Do you think that's the reason why there hasn't been exposure? Or do you think it's down to something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.